Okay, good afternoon and welcome to Art and Algorithms and the Frost Art Museum at FIU. I'm Miriam Machado, Education Director, and I want to thank you all for tuning in and joining us today. We have her artwork is currently on view in our exhibition titled Transfiguration, a Black Speculative Vision of Freedom, an annual exhibition that is part of our MLK series here at FIU. And this exhibition sparks conversations on social justice. It was curated by Dr. Julian Chambliss from Michigan State University and explores Afrofuturism, which is both a philosophy and an aesthetic of Black history, looking at the past, in the present, and the future. Dr. Nettrice Gaskins is an African-American digital artist who's I personally have gotten to know her better, is awesome. She's an academic, cultural critic, and an advocate of STEAM. In her work, she explores techno vernacular creativity and Afrofuturism. Dr. Gaskins works explores how to generate art using algorithms in different ways, especially through coding. She also teaches, writes, fabs or makes. She's taught multimedia, computational media, visual art, and even advanced placement computer science principles with high school students who majored in the arts. She earned her BFA in computer graphics with honors from Pratt Institute, MFA in art and technology from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, received a doctorate in digital media from Georgia Tech. She's taught at secondary and post-secondary levels in Boston Public Schools and at Massachusetts College of Art and Design. She's worked as a teaching artist for the Boston 100K Art Science Innovation Prize and was a youth media technology trainer for Adobe Youth Voices. She served as board president of the National Alliance for Media Arts and Culture and served on the board of the Community Technology Centers Network. Dr. Gaskins has also received funding from the National Science Foundation for Advancing STEM through culturally situated arts-based learning. She currently is the assistant director of the Leslie Steen Learning Lab at Leslie University and has published her first full-length book, Techno, Vernacular Creativity and Innovation, through MIT Press. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Nettrice Gaskins. Nettrice, welcome. We are so excited to have you here with us today.
Good afternoon. Just checking the time. Can everyone hear me? Assuming so, I'll turn my mic on. Good. I guess we're going to have a conversation. I know we're having some bandwidth issues, but what I want to do is I want to actually share my slides, and it's going to relate to the questions that I know Miriam's going to ask. So I want to just talk a little bit about techno vernacular creativity, I guess.
Yeah, we just had a little glitch right there. You know, I must have upset someone.
No, it happens. You know, it's just something that's just the way it goes. So you want to kick off a question, and maybe that's, you know.
Absolutely, yes. We're all wanting to know what techno vernacular creativity is. You know, I know that this is something that is something you've developed. So please tell us more.
So a woman named Tamara Carhart, she did this image for me. At the time, she listened to a lecture that I gave, and she made this visual. And so this is just a bunch of just stuff that I said that she heard me say, and then she kind of put together this visualization. So techno vernacular creativity is, it's a sort of model or framework to look at how sort of groups who are historically marginalized or excluded from science, technology, engineering, art, and math, how they engage those things. So it's not saying they're missing it. I'm saying that they're basically doing these things just in ways that are not always talked about. And so there's sort of three buckets for research and for education. One of them is reappropriation, another is remixing, and then improvisation. So some of the things that I talked about in terms of examples was there's a Sierra Leonean entrepreneur and DJ named DJ Focus, who just took stuff out of the garbage basically and created these innovative types of things for his community and for his DJ practice, which reminded me of Grandmaster Flash, who in the 70s took his knowledge of engineering and began to tinker with stuff to create devices that we use today, the DJs use today. And so it's really, really pushing against the idea that STEM education has to be traditional. It looks at it from both formal and informal education, and it's very arts-based, but it's also pluralistic. I'm looking at the African diaspora, but I'm also looking at indigenous groups and Native American people. I look at it a lot in terms of Afrofuturism, but also other futurisms from other cultures. So that's kind of, and I'm going to show some examples. And so this is Guillermo Bert. He is a Chilean artist and someone that I recently did a panel with a year ago, actually. And he has these QR code based works that link to indigenous mythologies and storytelling. And so it's a testament in terms of the woven object themselves and also the stories that they encode. So he transforms an emblem, in this case, the QR code, as an emblem of repressive secrecy to become a transmitter of cultural values. Labestia is actually in my book on the right, I'm sorry, on the left. And it is a story of an immigrant, his story. So when you scan that QR code, you hear his story. And also there's some kind of visual, what do you call it? Aesthetically, it fits the design of Mapuche weavings. So on the right, you can see an example of a Mapuche weaving that has very kind of graphic kinds of symbols in it. And in some cases, some of those designs, not necessarily in that one weaving, but in some of the ones I've seen, look very much like the QR code. So it's a good matchup. This is Natakalilo Mutiti. She's from Zimbabwe, but she's based here in the US and she's a professor. And she uses this term called rucka. And rucka in the Shona language is used to describe the processes of braiding while assigned to the production methods of weaving and knitting. So, but once again, weaving and knitting, braiding, these are all kind of heritage artifacts. And the processes of making these things are related to the development of coding languages and computation. So she uses the act of braiding or having her hair braided as the foundation of her body of work in this particular case.
So, well,
yes.
Oh yeah, you have more, yes.
I'll stop and I'll let you respond. So we want to bring this into the classroom. So I worked with Ron Eglash of the African Fractals TED Talk fame and his team, and I worked with a graduate student to develop this tool that they can use online to sort of understand the computation in Nancy's work. So by coding, which you can see in the middle, creating this code, they can then create the type of work that Nancy simulate what she does with the floor tiles you saw in the previous image. So this is beginning to get to the algorithmic part. There are algorithms and instructions to make this design. So I'll let you, Miriam, if you have something to respond there. I have other images, but.
No, I think this is fascinating. We're getting a lot of comments in the chat of how absolutely cool this is. This is a very interesting thing that I think many of us don't realize, that in indigenous cultures, the weaving and all that processes that they do as part of their heritage is also something that translates into an algorithm. So it's really super interesting. You can go ahead and show us what you have next. I have
Sure.
lots of questions, but we have some time.
Yeah, I'll go through them quickly just so that people know what I'm talking about.
Okay, sure.
And the other piece of this tool is that it plays music. So we understand that there's a polyrhythmic aspect of music across the diaspora. So when you play this, music plays as well. And this is the Mabira kalimba sound. It just comes from Zimbabwe that also plays when you play this design. And this is the West Central, the Congo. This is the Kuba textile artisans, and they are this kind of famous Kuba textile process is basically algorithmic because we actually have some researchers, and you can see the article there, who've looked at the Kuba textiles that are done by the women in the Congo as algorithms. And so they have a graphic that you can see there where they actually spell out the rules of the algorithm for that particular textile. So the patterns are generative, but they're also algorithmic, so they're computational. Um, and so there's both extracting this information as it relates to computation, but there's also at some point, my goal is to feed that value back into the communities that this information and knowledge is extracted from. Um, so this is my work, and this is a recent example where I'm using something called Deep Style, which is Leon Geddes. Geddes was is a computational computer scientist who created the algorithm to take images. So you have a source image, in this case, this antique lace, and you take a photograph. So the source image is the photograph, and then the style image in this case is the lace, and you can produce images like this one. So the algorithm is preset, it's a pre-existing training set, but you're training, you're teaching, you're sort of telling the AI, these are the images. And so I've gotten to the point where I can sort of figure out what photographs look best or work best with the system, as well as understanding how the algorithm actually works when I'm creating the work. This is one in the show. This is of Dedia Core 4, and I use the same tool as this one. And then these two. So these two, the style image was, I have a mobile app on my phone called Happy Color. And there's some abstract, it's almost like color by numbers, but it produces these really cool abstract patterns. So I decided to use the Happy Color uh, image that I had at the end as the style for the images, and for both for the Stacey Abrams and for the Octavia Butler here is used the exact same one. It looks different because in some cases I'm using more color, in other cases I'm using the original color, as in the Stacey Abrams case. But it is the system is sort of understanding that this is the source, and we want you to recreate this image using this style or multiple styles. I can use up to, I know, artists can use up to like 300 images to teach and train the system to be able to recreate or simulate these images, simulate the photographs as something new. So that's the last one. I can,
Well, we have several questions in the chat.
Sure.
So I'm going to go ahead and share with you. So some folks are asking if when you, first question is this related to Charles Babbage weaving machines and the first punch cards?
I don't think so. This predates it. I would say a lot of the work
Okay.
that's in like the Shona culture, the Kuba textiles all predate Babbage. And so they were doing these artifacts way before that. So what we're looking at when we look as researchers into it, we look at the idea that they're following a set of instructions. On the other side, we look at it from the art side. We look at the designs themselves and understand that from an aesthetic standpoint. So there are two things happening in that. What I do is I take my knowledge of, and this is where it comes to Afrofuturism and Black art. I look at my knowledge and my experience with music and with art and design from Black cultural production, and then I look at all the ways in which they are computational. So, for example, James Brown wrote a song or performed a song with his band called Cold Sweat. And a scholar named James Sneed decided in his essay about the song, he would do the notation and like the rhythm, the using letters. And so he basically did a algorithm of Cold Sweat, the chorus. And his point is what makes it distinctive from other musical forms is that it uses repetition, and it uses something called the cut. And the cut is very important. It's really hard to understand the cut because it's not linear. It's the idea that is you take a sample or you loop it, you come back to the original sequence, but you can also disrupt it. So you cut into the sequence and then you can respond back. So when you listen to Cold Sweat, you hear them the musicians doing that. It's also a practice because James Brown would oftentimes have his band lay down the track, like lay down the main rhythm, the main song, and then he would come in and with his knowledge and cut in at places where he thought it needed to happen. And that's known as the first funk song ever recorded. And so James Brown was pulling from his knowledge of gospel, of R&B, of all the musical forms that he knew from his community, and he was able to do that. So there is a relationship between the rhythms in Cold Sweat and the rhythms in Kuba Textiles. And if I did do
Wow.
a test to see, and I ran
Oh,
Cold Sweat through a visualizer, and it produced patterns that look like the Kuba Textiles and look like G-spin quilts. So there is a relationship in the patterns from the
that's
algorithm.
wow. That's mind blowing. I mean,
Hmm.
that's crazy. And cool. So cool to learn that, you know. Um, we had another question in the chat too when you were speaking about deep style or the
Mhm.
style. Is that within the Deep Dream program? And could you expand a little bit about that? How that works? Because some folks, I guess, have learned a little bit about Deep Dream and
Sure.
they wanted to know more.
So around 2015, Google, they released the code to Deep Dream. Deep Dream was a very trippy um, program that was kind of, if you're on LSD and um, using everything on the internet to make art. So it's the same idea as you take a source image, but then it was like images that came out look very like psychedelic. They all kind of looked around the same in terms of psychedelic with dogs and cats and all kinds of generic things pulled from the internet to make the images. And so that's the original Deep Dream. So when they released the code to the rest of the world, people started creating platforms like the one I use, and then they started incorporating other algorithms in addition to the original. So there's a thin style, there's a deep style, which is what I like. There's the original Deep Dream, and then you can go to the platform and use that if you want. And then they've just been improving on that over time. So what I use is called it's called Deep Style or the Gaddis algorithm. And so there's a whole academic paper about that algorithm, about how it was designed and developed and how it works. So, if you look, it's GATYS. And I actually didn't know that until a researcher saw my work. And first he told me in the comment section of this particular post that it wasn't Deep Dream. And so I said, yes, it is. I go to the Deep Dream Generator and use it. He said, no, that's not Dream. Send me the link. So I sent him the link to the platform, and he came back to me in the same thread and said, oh, okay. So he was doing some looking at other people's work. He is writing papers for Adobe on machine learning and art. And he said, I think what's happened here is the artist's hand has taken over the process. And that's why your images look different. And so it was the first time someone who knew the computer science side of things was able to say, this is why your images are coming out different, is your knowledge of being as an artist has taken over the process of the machine.
Which is
So,
fantastic
mhm.
because a lot of people might assume that because you're using a machine to generate images that somehow the artist's skill is lost, but on the contrary, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think about all the times I struggled. I didn't. I was a rebel, so I rebelled through light color and design as a freshman, as a college freshman, and I had a professor. I had to take it 2 semesters, so I had to learn how color. I had to learn color theory, and I had to apply color theory in my work. That knowledge goes into the images that I make in Deep Dream.
Sure.
The algorithm does not know color theory at all. Um, so it pays to get the art training, even though you're using a machine tool.
Yeah, no, I remember you mentioned in one of our previous conversations that that you have all the training that an artist would receive in addition to your computer programming and engineering training, so that you needed that also. That's why you're creating. You couldn't do it without it.
Mhm.
So that's really interesting. And for all those digital artists out there, you see, you need to know a lot more.
Yeah.
Right. So the other things that I was wondering about, and I'm sure many others are too, is this whole idea of your relationship as an artist with artificial intelligence. How do you feel about that? How do you how do you see other artists? Maybe is this something that's going to be used more widely? What are your thoughts on that?
It's not just images. So I got funded. I'm on a team of 3 women who got funded by the Mozilla Foundation this year to look at Trinidad Carnival and AI. So we're looking at performance sculptures or dancing sculptures, and how to sort of collect information from the dancing sculptures to create new art using AI. And so this case, we're not using Deep Dream. We're developing the tool, the machine learning from by on our own, and then coming out with output that we could share in a gallery or exhibition or anything like that. So we're still doing the same machine learning, but we're using performance this time instead of in video and actual live performances instead of just still images or 2D images.
Wow, that's amazing, and that's going to be fantastic because I know that the folks. I have a friend who's from Trinidad and Tobago, and they take their carnival very seriously. You
Mhm.
know, they've been doing the design of the costumes for years, and
Absolutely.
it's I think his name is Maskman or something like that. He's like very well known. So that should be very interesting to see how you turn into sculptures that move or
Yeah,
whatever,
we
you
don't
know, in a
we'll see
video.
what we see what the output gives us, but the my team members, Vernell is from Trinidad and she's an architect and
Oh,
professor, and then Valencia is a dancer from Barbados,
oh, wow.
and so we're from the diaspora. So each one of us brings something to the table, and we all work with new media in some way in our craft, in our work. But I think also the idea is not to extract the cultural information and then just not give back. We want to generate it back into communities. So it's meant to be culturally sustaining, not something that we extract and take away, but that it's helping communities. It's continuing the knowledge. So it's amplifying the past, and this is where we get into Afrofuturism. It amplifies the past and brings it into some present form for the future. So what are as we won't lose these practices, we'll just evolve them into maybe
Great.
new practices, and that's what we're exploring here.
So absolutely, then the future generations will become more familiar
Mhm.
with not only their heritage, but ways of using computational skills to
That's right.
continue to evolve and develop,
Mhm.
which is, I think, fabulous. I think that's fantastic. Um, So that brings me to a couple of other ideas. I know that as an educator, you have vast experience teaching all different levels. What are you teaching at the moment? I know STEAM is a you're an advocate for STEAM, and
Mhm.
so am I. But I think mine is quite different. I'm always trying to reach out to kids who actually don't get exposed. But I know that you're doing great work with bringing in other underserved populations and marginalized communities to understand that they can work in careers that have to do with STEM and STEAM. Can you tell us more about that, about your work?
Yeah, I think I do have an approach, and it comes from the stuff I was talking about with techno vernacular creativity, and that is looking at the artifact itself, finding out what connections are in that artifact. So, in the cases of the examples I gave, there was some kind of computational artifact in it. It was encoded with some kind of cultural story or some sort of, aesthetic or design, and then linking that to an actual project or activity or task that you have to do as a student. So one example is we're looking at. I was noticing some Somerville, Massachusetts librarian was talking about trying to teach during Black History Month her students about the Underground Railroad and the quilt codes, and the quilt the codes in the quilt to guide enslaved people from one station to the next on the railroad. And I thought about that, and she was very, she wanted to know how we could do that with technology. So I decided to merge the idea of a quilting bee, or like looking at some of the social justice with the freedom quilts, and also with the G-spin quilts, and then looking at this idea of collaboration and community that happens there, and then looking at the hip hop cipher, which is like in breakdancing and graffiti, which is forming the circle to sort of in a call and response, very similar to what happens with the quilting bee, and then do that in a 3D modeling program called Tinkercad. So yesterday we did a South by Southwest workshop called Culturally Relevant Making in the Pandemic, and so I had them do a cipher in Tinkercad, using this cultural practice of the cipher, and the Quilting Bees, where they made a 3D quilt, and worked together in the same space. So they were all in the same model, feeding off of each other. So really looking at a cultural practice and going deep, to really, for the teachers to understand, and also because I've seen kids and young people do ciphers, and not even from adults, just it was passed down from, but there's a kinship building, there's a way in which it's not hierarchical, so there's no leader. It's something where people are sharing. You could be in a cipher and not have to perform and just learn, without having to be in the center of the circle. So there are a lot of benefits to using that as a way to learn. And so that's what I do. And that's the approach that I have when I do this culturally relevant and culturally sustaining type of stuff on the educational side for STEAM. I don't really get bogged down into what's Common Core. It's very like, you can, if I'm rotating something in 3D, I'm rotating its geometry. If I'm sizing and making bigger or larger, that's dilation, that's geometry. That's exactly what they're learning. So, but they're having to be, in this case, making a quilt. So, teachers got a chance to practice that, but that's kind of my approach.
Well, I'm personally looking forward to acquiring your book that I know is going to be released soon, correct?
It's in the summer.
In the
So
summer.
there's a push. You can pre-order it, but yeah, it's still a few months away.
Because I was going to say, my experience working directly with teachers, and when everything got upended, that they, schools wanted to become STEAM designated and all that, a lot of people got lost the creativity part, worried about the curriculum part, meeting all these different aspects of it. And I think that your approach is actually cultivating that feeling of from within, that you're creating, you're communicating with each other, and that's much more long lasting and important than just knowing that you got in a science aspect of it. And if teachers could be trained to understand this more, I think their work would be a lot easier as well, because they often, it comes up, it's like the engineering component is always missing, or they just can't think beyond, right?
Well, so I made a glove. Unfortunately, it's been loved up so much now it doesn't work. But I made this glove that converts colors to sounds.
Oh my gosh.
So you put the glove on, and then and so we performed with this glove on New Year's at the convention center locally. And what was interesting to me, I just walked around with this glove, just, we were performing, and people really wanted, because it converts colors to sound, they wanted to know what their skin color sounded like.
Oh, wow.
So I spent half an hour, people walking up to me, putting their hand out, or, and really wanting to hear what their skin, and then if they had a family, what's her skin sound like? What's her? So I told some young people about this experience, and they decided to do their own glove, and they call it the rainbow glove, for a project around, it was Black Lives Matter. So their point was that if you had just a white piece of paper and you use the glove, there's no sound. I mean, it's just playing the same note. But if you had all different colors, then you'd have this kind of harmony. You have all this melodies and all these things. And they wanted to say, without these colors, you get the beauty of why you would need to have that through the glove. So that was their interpretation of the glove. And they did a workshop with some grad students, but these were high school students who got the point and decided to go in that direction. There's another example of some high school students who learned about conductive paint and microcontrollers.
Oh, wow.
And so they wanted to perform on a dance floor made up of paint that would play music when they danced on it.
Wow.
So they did this for chemistry class. So they learned the chemical properties of the paint, and they learned how to perform on the floor and live. And when they did the choreography based on what they learned about how the molecules moved in the paint.
Wow.
So this was their idea. This was something that I did not tell them to do. I just told them how to use the paint and how to use the microcontroller, but they did the choreography, and they figured out how to make. So the kids are ready. They're ready for these connections.
Well, that's fabulous. And, those are the types of lessons that you never forget.
Yes.
because you're actually doing as you're learning, so you're never
Mhm.
going to forget that. I think we have a couple questions in the chat, and let me see. um, so we have a question here about someone who's working with young children that are making art, and the kids became interested in Deep Dream, but they also have something called Prisma app to create. What advice or suggestion do you have to incorporate these technologies with these young children?
I don't know about Prisma app. I don't know what that is, but I do. I did do a workshop with kids last week with Deep Dream, and they were already doing projects in their program. So they took some of their artwork, the drawings, cartoons that they were doing, superheroes, and then they took it through Deep Dream to create. And they actually learned. They created certain effects that they wanted to incorporate into their work in general, and so they looked like they were really into it. Um, and I teach kids how to create biomechanical cyborgs, how to do the Deep Dream. So it's not just Deep Dream. um, and I guess, and for me, I just fully engage in the technology. So when I taught, the reason I came to Deep Dream was through teaching. I wanted to show the students how to do art using AI. And I wanted them to understand AI through the art process. So by teaching it, then I realized I liked it. And then I decided to do it myself over time. And then I got better at it. So it came from teaching, initially using the Deep Dream to teach students how to do computer science.
And have you noticed that these students who may have really shunned away from computer science, as they become more comfortable with it in creating their art, are they more inclined to want to follow that career path?
Oh, I don't know. Someone can keep track of them. They move on. But I would hope so that at least some of those barriers are gone. And
Right,
some
right.
people, and there's some students who keep, who do keep, in touch with me, and some of them do go into computer science. Some of them already have tracked themselves into a STEM area. I've had college students, from like a student graduated from Cornell, and she was a bioengineer and decided that she didn't see any representation. And so she's Nigerian American. And so she was going to leave the field. So
Oh,
she reached out to me and we had conversation, and she found a way to bring her culture into bioengineering. And she was just getting, maybe as a graduate student, maybe she's doing that right now. But
wow.
so it's not so much, it's that you have to make that link
Right.
between the subject area. In this case, her science was engineering and science, to her culture, something that represents her, that she could see herself in.
Right, right. No, absolutely. That I think goes for, without saying, for every cultural institution. Us as an art museum, we strive to represent everyone, that people come in and they can see themselves in our exhibitions, that it's not, exclusive of anyone, as much as we can. We try to do that. We have one more question in the chat about your influences, like your beginnings. And then I know we have so much more. We're going to run out of time.
I'll do the
Um,
Second Life thing too.
oh
Too. I'll
yeah.
I'll tag that on. So my mother was a computer programmer. That's what she did for a living. I was around a parent who was doing computation every day, but she was just doing computer programming, nothing creative from my point of view as an artist. And so she was very supportive of me being an artist. So I never felt, she in fact pushed, we did ballet, I took oil painting in middle school, or whatever. Um, so the arts were always around me, and I was always encouraged to do art. And so at some point, a high school became a magnet, where I lived in Louisville, Kentucky. And teachers helped me prepare, and I auditioned and got into the visual arts program in high school. So that meant that a good chunk of my time was spent during every day doing art. And one day, my pottery teacher decided that she wanted to teach a computer graphics class, and she needed some volunteers to take this first class. And had no interest in computers at all. I saw my mother's work, and I said, "That's not art, and I don't want to do a class on computer graphics." So she is was one of my favorite teachers, so she talked me into it. And I needed the elective, but I once I sat down and I started moving pixels around, I got it. And that's what got me into Pratt. So that's got into Pratt on that portfolio and studied computer graphics that, and then went into grad school for art and technology. I never really left the field. I did take a break to do nonprofit and community work for many years and education work, but I never left the field. And at some point around 2005, I discovered Second Life, and I discovered that artists were creating art shows and art installations in a virtual 3D space. And at some point, companies like IBM would give residencies to artists to be able to do their thing in Second Life. So I applied in 2010. Applied to do an Afrofuturist cultural production in Second Life. And I got in, so I got the residency, and it was right when I transitioned to PhD school. So I'm going to share a video, and I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'll skip around a little bit, but basically, they give you an island, and you get an island, and you get all these ways you can make stuff. We make whatever you want. And then just like with a museum, they will curate it. They will do the promotion and marketing for it. And then people just show up in their avatars and they go through the exhibition. So it's called Alternate Futures. And it was very much about Afrofuturism. And the space, the island is split in half. Half of it's utopia, the other half is dystopia. And it's also about portals and about this idea of time travel or something you can do in Second Life is transport your avatar from one location to the next by clicking on something. So thinking about Star Trek and this idea of teleportation. So that's possible in Second Life. So really playing up on maps and portals and this idea of utopia, dystopia. Octavia Butler, I had an Earthseed forest in the back of the where people could go, and it was like a sandbox. So I'm going to show some of it. But there's also a history thing looking at the legacy of cotton in slavery and how we move into kind of like the 70s with and civil rights and Black nationalism and looking at funk music and all that kind of stuff. So you're gonna see it's like my everything in my head in terms of knowledge just exploded into this virtual 3D space, and so I can play that now.
Oh, it's gonna be awesome, I'm sure.
Okay, let me pull it up.
Imagine if Octavia Butler would have been able to do that. That's been so cool because her books are amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have it. I'm going to pull it up now.
Okay, let's go.
And so someone did this. I did not do this. This is someone's going through and the show. So I'm going to skip around a little bit. I'm gonna skip through it. So the videos online, I just want to get, because for time, we can't watch the
Yeah,
whole thing.
right.
But I do want to share this one particular thing to show even computer programming or coding is even in Second Life. Let's see if I can find. Um, so there was a dystopia, and there's a particular project. This is the dystopia side. Looks at the school to prison pipeline, and so the pipeline that sort of tracks Black and brown kids through incarceration from school.
Wow.
And so that's literal, but then there's this one place, and I'll stop there, that looks at surveillance. Let's see, I think it's at the end of this. Yeah. We can stop there. These eyes were coded by me to follow the avatar. So I needed to figure out a way to simulate what it feels like to be watched all the time out in public. So in terms of racial profiling, in terms of creating a sense of you're always being watched. So I had every single one of those little eyeballs in the wall follow the avatar around. They all follow at the same time, simultaneously. And so it was important for me to do that. And let's see, did we lose Miriam?
Yes, we did.
I can look at some of the questions. Sun Ra, Sun Ra's in it. George Clinton's in it. Octavia Butler's in it. There's lots of artists, graffiti artists that do very futuristic stuff, like pioneers like Rammel and his Gothic futurism and Futura 2000 or Futura. Lots of Grace Jones is in it. And so there are lots of different folks from the Afrofuturist culture production, cultural scene that I simulated their work or even created some version of them in the space. And so my earliest experiences is as a visual arts student. I went to a arts high school for the arts, and so I had to take classes, and every day in the arts. I went to college. My first year at Pratt was taking every class. We all had to take foundation level courses. So I was taking drawing specifically, sculptures, like 2D and 3D work, art history, as well as I forget what else we had to do. Also had to do typography, which I hated, but anyway, there was required classes that I had to take, but light, color, and design was really the class that kind of changed things for me. Learning how to do color theory was amazing. It impacts my work even today, as well as my drawing and painting. So back to you, Miriam. I know you're back.
Sorry, I got how things are crazy today, and I got kicked off, so I have to log back on. But here I am. So Nettrice, it's such a pleasure. I am so happy to have met you, and I'm so happy that it's incredible to see what's happening in the world that we're at least I wasn't aware of with the digital and computer world and the all the skills that we can develop, you know, even for our future generations. All these things they can be applied in so many different ways. So I think it's so fantastic. I was going to ask you about, since I got logged off, I don't know if you went into the surveillance and the research that you did about biases in surveillance.
Yeah, just in terms of coding. So in the virtual world, in Second Life, you can use sort of a JavaScript type of language to program. So all the graphics that are moving, those objects have been programmed to move.
Okay.
They don't move, so they move the way. And so you have to know computer programming. Even you can put objects in there and they don't move and they don't do anything. You can walk through them, you can make them transparent. But if you want to create animations or have the earth move, or I think I did a Saturn that moved in there, you have to know some coding. So once again, it comes back to computation, not just the computer being a place where we can look at art, but also where we can move art or we can make it dynamic. And so it never really, it always has been for me, the tool may change, but sometimes the same skills are required time and again. One point I'm using Deep Dream to make portraits. The next time I'm creating my own Deep Dream with my partners to look at carnival and dance performances. Let's see if there's any other questions in the chat. Someone asked about believing the transition from STEM to STEAM is important. In the studies and my research, I've been working with students who are not really, don't really care about science, technology, engineering, or math. But they all have some kind of creative expression in their lives. And so I was doing workshops with kids where I did a workshop in Lithonia, Georgia, with middle school students around quilts, but just the practice of quilts and what happens when you're moving the patches and improvising and repeating patterns. And I found the teacher that was there, it was her class, she decided on her own to do the same activity with other students. And she told me that they were more engaged in that activity than ever and anything else she had done. And because it was familiar to them, some kids tell me they would have their grandmother's quilts. They reminded them of stuff from home. And other ways, they just like the idea of remixing something. That's very much a part of the culture. And so the art part is very important. It's the one thing that makes me want to know about math is through art. I learned about math through art. Science I was okay with, but I did not like math at all. So had someone approached me as a student then and said you could, learn about math and make art, I probably would have been better in math or been more interested in math. Nobody ever bought that. Nobody ever bought that I couldn't do the math. I just didn't want to do the math. Now, I'm the daughter of someone who's a genius at math, but I'm the artist and I'm somebody that didn't really make the connection.
Yeah, I would have been the other student too, saying, I love art, but I don't want to do the math. Yeah. And, over the years, you realize how much math there is in all things. I mean, it's incredible, but we don't recognize it. And so that's why I find that, your work is fascinating, it's amazing. And the fact that you're bringing this to students who may not see themselves as future computer programmers or engineers or would even become interested in math is so fantastic, because you're bringing it from a place where they already know who they are, asserting themselves, their heritage, feeling proud of who they are and where they came from. I think that is such an important aspect of education, and we all need to really focus on that. So there is a couple of more questions before we go.
There's a quick note that some of the work, new work, because it's not going to be anything you've seen, is going to be in the Smithsonian Future Show in November. So
yeah,
there's a big show for Futures that's looking at, Octavia Butler is one of the portraits I am doing for the show, but I'm doing 11 images for that show, or 10 to 11 images of futurists. for the Smithsonian. And so it's become a bigger thing than I imagined when I started teaching in computer science for high school students. Now the work is going into major institutions, including the Frost and in the Smithsonian and other places.
Yeah, we're a Smithsonian affiliate too, so that's fantastic. I would love to, schedule workshops with you forever, because that way I would learn so much more. The glove project, are these any of these projects something that you publish, that teachers can have access to and try and then get back to you and let you know?
Yeah, I did do a bunch of instructables, not for the glove, but for stuff in the past year to help educators and even families that were trying to learn remotely. And so I can put a link to that in the chat.
Yeah, I can just imagine as the university repopulates, if we had one of those gloves around or a couple of them, and how students, we're an international university, how would that data, look like? What would it be? It would be such a cool experience.
And so the glove is pretty hard to make.
Okay.
Just to let you
Never
know, that's
mind.
really tiny pieces. I did also make something called the Insynth Super Machine, and it's a box. It does music and AI. And so it came out of Google just like Deep Dream. And I remember I was sitting at Autodesk Technology Center in Boston, and I was a resident there. And I was like, I bet there's a AI music, like Deep Dream is. And sure, it's called Insynth, and you have to make the box. So it's literally electronics, kind of advanced electronics. You have to do tiny soldering and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And then, so I got as far as turning the box on, and then the pandemic hit. So the box works, meaning that it turns on, but the whole point is what it does that I'm really wanting to get into is I want to take that funk music thing with the disruption things. I want to see what happens with AI, because AI is going to try what this box does. It tries to take and find new sounds in between notes. So sounds that didn't even exist before. So when you play, you're playing some maybe musical notes that's never been heard before. And I really want to go there with that. So I need to give myself the time to finish it. And so it keeps going and stuff. There's always a project.
Well, no, that's fantastic. I'm looking forward to learning more. Let me see if there's any other questions in the chat. Well, the comments are fantastic. In fact, everybody wants to go visit you. Yeah, definitely. Let's see, any other questions before we go? I don't see any others in the chat. Nettrice, it's been my sincere pleasure to have met you, to learn about your work. I am so excited to keep following you wherever you do. I read your blog posts. I read everything in Medium.
Yeah, the Medium's good because all the new stuff is on the Medium.
And the stuff you put in there, sometimes it has such great perspective. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the attendees today. Thank you everyone for joining us. And once again, Nettrice, thank you. I hope our paths will cross again, and maybe we'll do a couple workshops together for our community here. So thank you. Thank you, everybody. And stay well. Bye-bye.
Bye.